Hey everyone, it's Carissa at Sprinkled with Glitter. Thanks for joining me today. Today we're going to be doing a little felt piecing, and I'm featuring these new dies from Neat and Tangled. These are the Cactus and Llama stitching dies, and I think they are so adorable. I've done something like this similar in the past, but I wanted to kind of show you a little variation on this. So I have a few different colors of green felt here. Now, something you want to keep in mind is that you do want to use a high quality 100% wool felt. I find that the cheaper felts just don't die cut as well, but when you're using a good high quality wool felt, these die cut like a dream, and you don't have to do anything really special to get them to die cut well. Now, I wanted to show you that you can use like a rotary trimmer and a straight edge to cut your strips of felt, but today I'm going to be using some dies to make the process really easy because, let's face it, I am not that great with a rotary cutter. But if your trimmer has like a rotary blade on it, you may be able to do some cutting of felt in that. Mine just doesn't have that type of blade. So I'm taking the various colors of green felt and I'm just cutting them to be a little bit larger than this Wonky Chevron cover plate here. And I'm going to take these and I'm going to run them through my Gemini Junior. Now, I did add a metal shim to this sandwich on top of the die, and this cut really well. So if you have a metal shim, you may want to try that out, but I have had success in the past die cutting this high quality felt without a shim. So just kind of experiment in your die cutting machine. I have really good luck with the Gemini Junior and I really like it. And it did a great job cutting through this felt. Now, you're not going to get as great clean cuts if you're using like a lesser quality felt. So some of the felts that you'll buy at like big box stores, they'll have a lot of acrylic in them rather than 100% wool. So you won't get as clean of cuts. But this 100% wool felt, it die cuts beautifully. So once I've run all of these through the die cut machine, I have a pile of these wonky chevron shaped strips of green felt that I can then piece together to create a really cool felt embellishment for my card. And I'm taking just a piece of 80-pound neenah Solar White cardstock and I'm cutting it to be slightly larger than my cactus die here. And I'm going to cover this with some stickit adhesive. So stickit adhesive is a sheet adhesive. It die cuts really well. And so I'll just kind of expose the adhesive here. I'm going to add my cardstock to that adhesive. And then I'm going to cut down around that cardstock and I can save the other pieces for future projects. So you can see I'm just running this through my trimmer here to trim off the excess stickit adhesive. And then I'm going to take this sheet of cardstock that has stickit adhesive on the back and I'm going to run it through my die cut machine. This is going to really press the adhesive into the cardstock. I'm not using any dye at this point. I'm just running it through the die cut machine for the pressure to kind of really press that adhesive onto the cardstock. Now, once I take it out of the die cut machine, I'm going to take the second backer that's on the stickit adhesive and I'm going to pull it down. I'm going to leave a little bit on the bottom so I kind of have a grip on this piece of cardstock. And then I'm going to take these strips of green felt and I'm going to start pressing them onto the stickit adhesive. Now, I did want to mention also that if you don't have felt in your stash, you can absolutely do this with cardstock. I just thought with these stitching dies, it would be really fun to have these felt accents because I am going to add some stitching around the edge of them a little bit later. And that just gives it an extra kind of texture to the card. And I think it's really fun to kind of experiment with different types of mediums on your cards to give them different textures and different looks. This is something that's very tactile. It would be really fun to give to a child because they really like to feel different textures and that sort of thing. And you can see I'm just taking the various colors and strips of these green felts and I am just pressing them and stacking them one on top of the other, just making sure that all of the edges meet. Now you're going to notice that I only am using 2 of the greens that I die cut. I ended up really just liking this really limey kind of pear green along with that mossy green. So I decided to leave out kind of that grassy green. But keep in mind, you could do this in an ombre fashion. You could do this in a rainbow kind of color scheme. You could use all one color and just kind of have the different textures butting up against each other. So it's just really whatever works for your project and whatever you want. And you can see once I have that paper covered with the felt, I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess, and I'm going to take my cactus die. And this time I'm going to add a metal shim, but I'm actually going to cut into the metal shim. So the die blade is facing that metal shim. When you are using the Gemini Junior, you can actually do this. And what it does is it gives you that metal on metal effect, kind of like scissors, and it will cut absolutely beautifully through the cardstock and the felt and that stickit adhesive. So you'll have no problem with that at all. Now I did mention this earlier, but I wanted to point out that I'm using 80-pound neenah Solar White cardstock on the back of this felt because I didn't want to add too much thickness to where my die would not be able to cut through all of the layers. So I did use a lighter weight cardstock than what I usually prefer to use. The 80-pound is a great general use cardstock, but for most purposes, I find myself preferring the 110 pounds. So just keep that in mind. So now that I have my pieced felt die cut here, I'm going to add some stitching around the outside. And these dies are great because they do create the holes for you. I am not going to bother with poking out all the holes before I go through and stitch. As I take my tapestry needle and I come through these holes, it's going to pop out the little piece of felt and cardstock that's left in the die cut. And so I'm not going to do that ahead of time. It's going to save me a little bit of time if I just stitch with these in and they pop right out when I stick my needle through. So I'm just doing a basic blanket stitch around the outside edge of this cactus. And so I am coming up from the back side and running my needle up to the front side and then just wrapping the thread around the edge of the cactus and going back around to the back side and coming up through the back side to the front side. This is a really easy way of adding a little bit of stitch detail to these stitching dies, and I think it's a fun way to add a contrasting color. You're seeing here that I'm actually using this dark kind of red corally color, and I'm just going to show you the stitching with this here in the beginning, and I ended up getting maybe a third of the way around this cactus and deciding that I wanted to use a lighter coral color. So I went back and redid all this because I'm crazy like that. You're seeing here, I'm finishing it up here. It's a really basic stitch. It's really easy to do. It's fun and relaxing. I put my speakerphone on and talked to my mom while I was doing this. And so it's just something that's you can do while you're watching TV or kind of just something to keep your hands busy in the car. In fact, we're going away this weekend, and I think I may just take some of the stitching with me just to kind of have something to keep my hands busy. So once I've made it all the way around the cactus, I'm just going to take the thread to the back side, and I'm going to hold the end in place with a little bit of score tape and then just trim off the excess, and then I have my stitched cactus there. And I love the way the coral stitching looks around the edge of that green cactus. I think it's so much fun. And because I used that Wonky Chevron backdrop to die cut my felt, I have that cool kind of chevron pattern within the felt as well. Now I'm going to add this to a card front. So I have a piece of neenah Solar White. This is 110-pound Solar White cardstock, and it's cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So just slightly smaller than an A2 size card front. And I'm doing a little ink blending. I'm using the Distress Oxide in Tattered Rose and the Distress Oxide in Abandoned Coral. And I'm using these blending brushes to create a nice soft blend on my background. I'm just going to kind of tap off a little bit of the excess ink before I take the brush to my card project, and that helps me keep from getting like a big blob of ink, especially with these Distress Oxides because they can be quite pigmented and quite strong if you don't kind of tap it off. So as I pick up more ink, you'll see me kind of tap it off on a piece of scratch paper before I take it to my paper. So this project, I am going for a desert chic vibe, and that is my name for all this home decor that you've seen lately that have the cacti with the pink backgrounds, and then there's the llamas with the colorful kind of things around their necks and the little tassels and stuff. That's what I call desert chic. I know you've seen it in the stores. And so that's the vibe I'm going for here. So I created that soft pink background. I also added a little bit of ink blending to another piece of white cardstock and blended some ink on there so that I could create a die cut sentiment. And this banner shape is from the Skinny Strips die set from Neat and Tangled, and I absolutely love that. And I'm using the Happy Happy Birthday sentiment. This is from the So Many Sentiments stamp set from Neat and Tangled. And I'm stamping that in Versamark ink onto that ink blended banner there. I added some gold embossing powder and then I heat set that. And I'm going to offset that on another gold glitter banner that I've die cut using that same Skinny Strips die, because you know that all the desert chic stuff has gold with it. If you've seen it, you know that there's cacti, there's pink backgrounds, and there's gold frames. I know you've seen it. If you haven't, go to Hobby Lobby. They have it there right now. So this is a technique that I very rarely do, but I'm just adding some water droplets on top of this ink blended background. I let them sit there for a minute and then I soaked up some of that ink to give it a little bit of texture. And when I did that, I warped my cardstock. So I just took my little Mink tool here and I added this piece of paper into a folded piece of typing paper and I ran that through my Mink so that my cardstock is all nice and flat now and I can start assembling my card. So I'm adding my felt pieced cactus here to the front of my card using a little foam adhesive. And then I'm going to use some foam adhesive to adhere my sentiment strip there. And along the edge of this cardstock, I trimmed off a teeny bit, maybe about 1/8 of an inch. And I'm adding some gold glitter cardstock along the edge as well, just to give it a little bit more gold flavor because I like a little sparkle on my card. And to finish this card off, I'm just adding a few little gold confetti pieces. I added a couple of the little blooms on the cactus. And then I'm adding a little gold glitter to the base of those blooms using the tonic glitter drops in gold, just to add a little more sparkle and shine. And that completes my first card for today with that little desert chic vibe and a little bit of felt piecing to create a really fun effect and a very tactile feel on this card. So now that we've finished that one up, let's jump in and create a card using the llama really quickly. I'm not going to show you the whole process because a lot of the things are the same. But this time I am cutting smaller strips using the Skinny Strips die. And this one doesn't have the banner end on it. So I'm going to take 3 different colors of felt and cut 2 of each of the colors with this Skinny Strips die. Now, if you wanted to, you could cut these at varying widths to add a little bit of interest to it, but I just kind of wanted to keep it simple. And I'm going to use these strips to create the little saddle or blanket on the back of my llama. So I've used kind of a minty color, a really bright green, and then this coral color. And then once again, I've taken a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock and I've added some stickit adhesive to it. Then I'm going to take these strips of felt that I've die cut and I'm just going to lay them at an angle across this, just making sure that they butt up against each other so there's no white gaps between the felt. And I'm going to create a pattern with these 3 different colors. Now I'm going to really press this on there, but as I run it through the die cut machine to die cut this, it's going to press that felt into the stickit adhesive. So I shouldn't have to worry about it coming loose. And since I'm adding stitching around the edge, I don't really worry about this kind of falling off or coming apart. So once I have all of my felt on there, I'm going to take the little blanket or saddle die, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to place it over that, and then once again, I'm going to build up my sandwich for my die cutting machine, and I am going to cut right into that metal shim, giving me that metal on metal pressure and creating a scissor-like effect. And this cuts beautifully through all of the cardstock, the felt, and the stickit adhesive. Now, I'm going to be honest, if I was not so lazy, I would have stitched this, but I was feeling a little lazy at this point. So I went ahead and just drew in a little eye with some eyelashes on my llama there. And I added some stitching around the llama and the saddle, and I adhered all of that together, or actually I stitched it all together. And now I'm creating a little garland for his neck, and I am just using the little scraps of leftover felt and cardstock sandwich here to create these little dots. And this little round dot comes in the Llama stitching dies set. And I'm going to create a little garland. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my same tapestry needle, and I have a little bit of coral embroidery thread, and I'm taking that needle and I'm kind of just sliding it horizontally through the layers of felt, kind of very close to the cardstock. And I'm just kind of running that through there so that I can string these onto a banner. So you can see it here. I'm just kind of going between the cardstock and the felt and just sliding that needle right through. And that way I can kind of string these along and create this little garland for my llama's neck. And then I can attach that on using a little liquid glue and kind of adhere it to the back of the llama as well. Now this ended up being a great way to kind of bring those colors in once again to the card. And I didn't show you the entire card on this llama card because I finished it off in the exact same way that I did all of the backgrounds and the accents for the cactus card that I created earlier. So that completes my 2 cards for today, featuring a little bit of felt piecing, a little bit of stitching, and these adorable new stitching dies from Neat and Tangled, which I think are so much fun for creating that desert chic look. Of course, you could always use different color tones and make these feel a little bit different. I think these would be really fun combined with a little bit of aqua as well. That would give it a totally different vibe and maybe not such a feminine vibe. But I have to say, I had a great time creating these cards, and I love that there is so much texture and so much going on these cards, but yet they are still very clean and simple cards. As always, I will have links to the featured products used in these projects in the description at YouTube. But if you head on over to my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com, I will have that linked below. Over there, you'll find more still shots, more information, and a complete list of supplies. As always, thanks for stopping by and hanging out with me. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you enjoyed these projects. If you did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss any of my card making and paper crafting video tutorials here. Thanks for watching and hanging out with me today, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the very end. You know, if you've made it this far, you are one of my favorites. If you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, go ahead and click that button on the left side of the screen. And here's a couple more video tutorials I thought you might enjoy.